Hello, hello. Welcome to this week's live Monday Music Motivation. Looks like we are up and running, so let's jump into it. So, what I want to talk about today is how I learned a piece and performed a piece with 16th notes going at up to 150 beats per minute, and I more or less learned it in one day, more or less, which is not ideal, and I wouldn't recommend doing it, but there's some situations where you kind of have to do those things, and it went pretty well. I was happy with how the performance went. The concert went well. I definitely made mistakes because we always make mistakes, always in every performance, but I don't think any of my mistakes were noticeable by anybody in the audience, and I think the piece came across really well and was enjoyable for the audience, which is what matters and what's important. Now, again, I wouldn't recommend doing this, but I think it might be interesting, and I think there's some sort of morals of the story that we can learn from this experience that I had last week. So what it was is I got the music a week before the concert. So the concert was last Saturday. I got the music the weekend before that. We had one rehearsal the weekend before that. But in that rehearsal, we decided the finger pattern of the piece would work better on A clarinet rather than B flat clarinet. And then literally that evening after that first rehearsal on it, I flew out of town and wasn't able to take my clarinet with me and then get back until the day before the concert to do it. So I had the one rehearsal a week before and kind of got a grasp of the piece. The way it worked was pretty much the whole piece was just a repetition of 16 notes, so it wasn't a terribly complicated piece to learn. As far as learning different components of it, the pattern of the 16th notes was quite awkward and didn't lay naturally on the clarinet, which is part of the reason why we changed it to A clarinet instead of B flat clarinet. And the piece was with electronics, and everything was doubled in the electronic part all the time, so it wasn't particularly exposed. So again, I learned a piece and performed a piece with 16th notes up to 150 beats per minute in about one day, but there was a lot of caveats to that, in that it was very repetitive and it was not very exposed, which are some of the lessons to learn here. When you're playing something and you have a small amount of time to learn something, you have to find the exposed stuff first and work on the exposed stuff as kind of a top priority, and also the very technical stuff as kind of a top priority. Now, so I wasn't able to practice really the whole week. I got an idea of how the piece goes a week before, which is also very valuable. Knowing how the music goes is half the battle. So figuring out how it goes made it much, much easier to learn. When I got the A clarinet part, was able to actually start playing it the day before the concert. And I think that's kind of another moral of the story, is start by figuring out how the music goes, and then you'll be okay. Now, fast forward to the day before the performance, when I have the part and am working on it. As I was practicing it and learning it, even though it was a day before and I had to get these notes going pretty fast, I still practiced it slow, which may seem crazy, and you may think, oh my gosh, if it was a day before, I need to make sure that I'm getting it up to tempo and able to play it up to tempo. Well, that day before, I played it towards tempo and played it fast to kind of test how fast I could play it occasionally, but that was probably less than 10% of my practice time. Much more of the practice time was doing it slowly, deliberately in control, and feeling really comfortable with it. And I think that's the most important takeaway from this Monday Music Motivation. For your motivation and inspiration today, I want you to remember that no matter what, no matter how little time you have, no matter how fast it has to go, no matter how complicated it is, you have to be doing it correctly, comfortably, in control, and that's going to be the most valuable form of practice. I learned this from working on the concerto I did recently, that if you do it slowly and in control, over time that's going to sink in. And even if the amount of time you have is one day, it's still going to sink in much better doing it slowly, comfortably, in control than fast and freaking out. The pattern, this very awkward pattern of this piece, didn't line up with the beats very, very well, where it kind of, sometimes it'll be a kind of a scale pattern that sits into the beat and is a note pattern that I can recognize very quickly and basically sight read it pretty comfortably, pretty quick pretty quickly at a fast speed as well. This was not one of those kinds of patterns. It was very awkward how it lined up with the beat. It was awkward how it lined up with the clarinet fingerings. It was awkward how it lined up with the note patterns and the intervals themselves. So every time, and at first when I tried to do it fast, I wasn't able to comprehend it. I wasn't able to kind of sink into it and feel where I was going and really understand it. So I had to go slow enough that I could really confidently start recognizing the patterns of this piece and this unique pattern of notes, and the patterns that were in there that were not patterns that I'm normally familiar with and comfortable with. And I had to go slow to do that. And I was able to successfully do it in one day because I did the slow work and went into it. So that's the biggest takeaway that I want you to take from this. But there's a few other things that I think were interesting as well. But if you remember only one thing, it's that no matter how little time you have, no matter how fast it has to go, do it slowly, comfortably, confidently, in control. Okay, hopefully I beat that in enough and you'll remember that one. The other thing, speaking of patterns and how patterns were working and recognizing patterns, there were no rhythmic patterns in the piece that I was unfamiliar with, at least in my part. There were some rhythmic patterns with how it fit in with the electronics that were really wild for this particular piece. But the individual rhythms in my part, there was no rhythm that I was unfamiliar with, which made it so I could tackle it very quickly and understand it very quickly. And that's the beauty of having really strong fundamentals. My rhythm fundamentals are strong enough that I could see all the rhythms in the piece, whether it was a dotted eighth note coming in after a 16th rest on the beat, so starting on the E of the beat, E, something like that. I was able to recognize that and see how that went, or the and of 4, or whatever it was. All of them were familiar because I have a strong sort of rhythm foundation and rhythm vocabulary, so I could understand how those rhythms were working. The notes, like I mentioned, were not so familiar, so I had to really break that down and really learn it. But my clarinet playing fundamentals are really strong, so I wasn't worried about getting any notes to speak or any notes to come out. So I could focus my bandwidth on the note pattern, and the tempo modulations were the new novel things that I really had to understand and kind of unpack and sink my teeth into. And I do feel like by the performance, I was really starting to understand the tempo modulations. By the day before the performance, the end of my first practice session on it, I was starting to understand the note pattern. I think if I maybe had one more week with it, I would have really got it really well. But again, the performance went quite well, and it worked out because nothing was super exposed, and it was easy to kind of fit in with the electronic part that was doubling all the parts. But it is possible to learn something in one day if you have good fundamentals in the first place and you take your time to go slow. So that's kind of the two biggest takeaways is anything's possible with good fundamentals, so you might as well work on those good fundamentals and always be developing your good fundamentals so you can recognize rhythm patterns, note patterns, musical ideas and phrasing ideas, and have a good grasp of playing the clarinet and be able to easily play all the different notes and registers and dynamics and have all of those good fundamentals going, because with good fundamentals, you can learn things much more faster, much more quickly, much easier, and more confidently as well. Then the other side of things is finding those things that you aren't familiar with, that aren't already trained into your fundamentals, and break them down so that it's easy and manageable, even if you need to play it really fast in a really small amount of time. So hopefully those are all sinking in. Before we wrap up, don't forget to fill out your practice template for the week. Here's what mine looks like. You can go to quickstartclarinet.com/get-started to get this exact template, or just recreate it with yourself with the date for the week, reflection of how things are going for you, your goal for what you want to accomplish, and then your plan. And you can see for my goal, it's the same thing that I'm encouraging you all to do, which is to continue trusting the process of practice, trusting that if you do things slowly, comfortably, confidently, in control in a small sections, really always simplifying so that it feels easy, that's going to sink in and pay off in the long run and be much more efficient and effective than kind of banging your head against the wall, trying to play unfamiliar things at a fast speed in an unconfident way, because that will not lead to successful performance. Simplifying, really getting it is what I think all of us need to be doing more of in our practice. So I hope that this has been a little bit of good motivation and inspiration for your week of practice. Don't forget to fill out your template, schedule it in your calendar so that you have a great week of practice this week. I look forward to seeing you next week in the next live Monday Music Motivation. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments, and I will see you next time. Have a great week, everybody. Bye.